For many years, numerous historians have tried using historical documents to trace the Shroud of Turin back before its appearance in Lire, France, around 1357. On this subject, an hypothesis has kept attention, the one proposed by Jan Wilson in 1978. Wilson proposed that the portrait of Christ that appeared in the city of Edessa would have been the Shroud of Turin folded in such a way that only the face was visible. This image was venerated in Edessa as a miraculous image of the face of Christ before its arrival in Constantinople in 944. Here is a picture that shows what the image of Edessa might have looked like if the hypothesis of Jan Wilson would be right. The major problem with this hypothesis is that it didn't take into account the evolution of the Edgar legend, which is strongly related to the different political and religious contexts of each period. For those who don't know this legend, here's a short summary in his most recent version. The King Edgar was afflicted with a skin disease and would have sent a letter to Christ in order for him to come to Edessa to heal him. Jesus also answered in a letter. Jesus told the king that he cannot come to Edessa, but promised him to send one of his apostles to heal him and to preach him the gospel. Jesus also sent to Edgar an image of his face miraculously imprinted on a cloth after he used it to wash his face. This image will heal the king and will serve as a protection against Edessa's enemies. As we will see, the Edgar legend and the image of Edessa will evolve during centuries in parallel with the questions related to the dogmas that were proclaimed by the Universal Church. At the end, we will look at another trail for the Shroud of Turin being in Constantinople before 1204. This presentation is a short summary of a complete paper that will be finished the next year. This article is written in collaboration with Yannick Clément and based on many papers of renowned historians. Point 1. The political and religious context in which the Edgar legend was written. We must wait until 202 AD to see the kingdom of Edessa becoming officially Christian with the conversion of his king Edgar IX. However, there were in Edessa numerous Christian currents already at the end of the second century AD. At that time, Christianity started to regroup the texts relative to its doctrine, but the theological debates and the question concerning the nature of Christ was a fertile ground for the coming up of new heresies. In that context, the apostolic churches that were directly founded by the most important apostles like Rome or Antioch served as references for the Christian doctrine that was considered sure and authentic. Consequently, having a church founded by one of the direct disciples of Christ allowed his bishop to have authority in face of the other Christian currents. So did the Church of Edessa, and the best way to do this was certainly to bring the evangelization of the city back to the apostolic age. It's in that context of religious disputes that appears in Edessa, most probably at the end of the 3rd century AD, the Edgar legend. The oldest written version of this text that has survived is the one of Eusebius, bishop of Caesarea, who at the beginning of the 1st century AD tells the story of Edgar V, king of Edessa, who lived at the time of Christ, of his miraculous healing and of his conversion by Hadae, a disciple sent by Jesus after his resurrection. To recount this legend, Eusebius based his work on Syriac documents that he would have consulted directly in the city archives and which he translated in Greek. In these documents were found, according to Eusebius, an authentic letter of Christ to King Edgar, which have been given to him by Adai. But the construction of the account and the terms used by his author, along with the theology contained in the Edgar legend, indicate that it's largely inspired by the canonical Gospels, like the exploitation of the term of believing without saying, or the exploitation of the term of seeing without believing. We found in the Edgar legend some terms that reflect the struggle of the Church of Edessa against certain heretical currents, like for example, the Manichaeans. In the Edgar legend, the name Adai, who is the apostle sent by Jesus to heal the king, is also the name of a real Manichaean missionary who performed miracles. Mani, the founder of the sect, wrote also a letter to the city of Edessa, just like Jesus, who sent a letter to Edgar. And the followers of Mani venerated his painted portrait, just like the theme of the painted portrait of Christ sent to the king Edgar by Adai. There is therefore in this legend a desire to affirm an apostolic filiation of the Church of Edessa by the means of Adai, so-called disciple of Christ, along with traces of the fight against numerous Christian heresies. In any case, there is no mention of image or portrait of Christ. Point 2. Why a portrait of Christ appeared only in the history at the beginning of the 5th century AD. At the end of the 4th century AD, a pilgrim known as Egeria visited Edessa. She discovered that in the letter of Christ to Edgar, Jesus said concerning the city, "No enemy shall again become master of it forever." This later addition that wasn't there in the primitive text seen by Eusebius is most probably due to the fact that at the time Egeria wrote her account, Edessa had never been invaded by the Persians. We can also note that in Eusebius' version, it's Edgar who is blessed by Christ. The transfer of a personal blessing of Jesus addressed to the king to a promise of protection concerning the whole city happened progressively throughout the 4th century AD. During the Council of Constantinople, held in 381 AD, the dogma of the two natures of Christ, human and divine, is proclaimed. And at the very beginning of the 5th century AD, in a text entitled The Doctrine of Adai the Apostle, appeared a new important addition to the Edgar legend, a painted portrait of Christ. What's important to remember here is that this painter makes this portrait with chosen paints. This demonstrates the artistic nature of the portrait. To justify the novelty, the archivist is no more a simple archivist, as he was in the primitive text seen by Eusebius, but he was also, here's the novelty, the king's official painter. In the post-Council of Constantinople context of the era in which this account was written, it seems more than probable that the portrait in question was invented and used by the Church of Edessa in order to counter the heresies by confirming the dogma of the two natures of Christ, and particularly his human nature. Point 3. Why this painted image was transformed into an image not made by human hands. The painted portrait, which was in Edessa, wasn't considered as having been created miraculously, nor as having protective powers. On the contrary, it's the letter of Christ containing his blessing on the city that, according to popular belief, will explain the defeat of the Persians against Edessa in 503, 540, and 544 AD, which was confirmed by the Byzantine historian Procopius of Caesarea. However, for this last attack, many years after Procopius, the historian Evagrius wrote that the victory is attributed to the image of Edessa, which is the image that has not been made by the hand of man. It's important to notice it's the first time in the Edgar legend that the image is described as not made by human hands. This new addition to the Edgar legend has been rendered possible thanks to the combination of many factors that were already existing. First, the transfer of the divine protection given to the city by Christ to the portrait that is exposed in Edessa. Second, a particular event that happened during the battle and attributed to the image, the water that revived the fire, with greater activity than the whole would have, according to Procopius. Third, the attribution of a miracle by an image of Christ could appear credible, because in 503 AD, in the town of Amid, located near Edessa, another portrait of Christ had delivered the city to the Persians because of his sins, thus providing a precedent. Fourth, we also know of a miraculous image in the town of Camiliana in 574 AD, and the victory of the Byzantines against the Persians was attributed to this image. This image is specifically described as made by miracle and without the art of the embroiderers nor of the painters. This image too served as a precedent to heal the establishment of the image not made by human hands of Edessa. Incidentally, a testimony comes to contradict the hypothesis sometimes proposed of a discovery of the image of Edessa at the time of the following down of one of the falls of the city during the flood of the 525 AD. Effectively, before 439 AD, an eyewitness comes in the city, especially to be blessed by the image of Christ that was there. Point 4. Is it possible to claim that this Mandylion was a burial shroud folded 4 times double, bearing traces of blood and the image of an entire body? First of all, by passing from a painted portrait to a miraculous image made by Christ himself, the image of Edessa played a key role in the unification of the church and also of the empire. The kind of miraculous image could be interpreted by everyone according to their own beliefs. In the Acts of Thaddeus, a document of the Edgar legend written in Greek during the 7th century AD, we discover how the image not made by human hands would have been created. It is written that Jesus washed his face with a cloth and that his image has been immediately imprinted on it in a miraculous way. In only one version of the Acts of Thaddeus, it's the word tetradiplon that is used to describe the cloth. In the other versions, the words used are stripes of cloth or handkerchief. The term tetradiplon is composed of these 2 elements, the word for and the expression folded in 2. concerning the prefix for. An Arab text of the 10th century sheds light on an important detail concerning the translation from Syriac of a word related to the aspect of the image. Hanan, who was a painter, took a square board and painted on it our Lord the Christ. He may be glorified in nice and beautiful colors. The word square in Arab language possesses the same root as the Syriac word for. So the Greek translator of the Acts of Thaddeus took the same Syriac term used by this Arab author. So the Greek translator of the Acts of Thaddeus took the same Syriac term used by this Arab author. But this time he translated it by tetra instead of square. The Greek and the Arab words reflecting the same Syriac expression, we can easily think that the support of the image, or the image itself, was square. However, it's surely possible that the clause use a support of the image could have been, for example, folded into or folded twice in order to be more easily inserted in the ancient square relicule. Along the centuries, other images of Christ started to bleed after an aggression, but each time a theological significance is given to the incident. It's the case of the most famous of these images, the image of Beirut, which was used against the iconoclasts during the second Council of Nicaea in 787. According to this legend, the Jews of Beirut traced an image of Christ when they nailed his feet and hands, pierced his side with a spear stab. Immediately blood and water gushed out. The image of Beirut should therefore have depicted the entire body of Christ along with blue stains. It's in this context that the Codex Vocianus Latinus in the 10th century introduces a unique variation in the Edgar legend. Christ sent to the king a towel on which is found not only the face, but the image of his entire body. In reality, this codex contains many manuscripts, among which some of them talks about the Edgar legend and the legend of the image of Beirut. In fact, in this codex, on the 10th century, we found all the elements necessary to back up and defend the dogmas of the Church. The entire body of Christ introduced in the Edgar legend in order to make reference to the dogma of the Incarnation, the blood and the water exiting from the Beirut icon in order to signify the Eucharist and the baptism, the miraculous image of the face of Jesus himself in order to affirm the divinity of Christ. Point 5. The Mandylion and the relics of the Passion. In 944, the image of Edessa passed into the hands of the Emperor Romanus I Nicapenus. We can now talk of the Mandylion, the new name of the image of Edessa. At that time, a new important addition is included in the legend. While on the road that brings the relic from Edessa to Constantinople, an exact replica of the image would have been miraculously imprinted on a tile. Also, the description of pilgrims who saw the relic in ceramic afterward in Constantinople told us that only the face appeared on it and that it was in color. The tile is always mentioned in association with Mandylion, and if the two relics were kept side by side, in the same place, but they were never associated to a burial close and to the other relics of the Passion. Then, in 1200, the guardian of the relics of the Pharaoh's chapel describes a shroud of Christ that seems to bear the image of his entire body because he makes sure to mention his nudity. Finally, 3 years later, the French nat Robert de Clary describes a shroud of Christ bearing distinctly the complete image of Christ's body and which was exposed once a week in the church of Our Lady of Patience. This shroud disappeared during the 1204 sack of Constantinople, according to Robert de Clary. On the other hand, Robert de Clary doesn't say anything concerning the couple Mandylion tile, which is normal, since in 1207 the guardian of the relics of the Pharaoh's chapel listed the treasure that was there and which, therefore, had not been stolen by the Crusaders in 1204. We found among other things the crown of thorns, the Mandylion and the tile. We know that these relics would be sold later on to Saint Louis. Effectively, Boniface de Montferrat, a Crusader chief, was quick to occupy the palace area where the Pharaoh's chapel was, so the relics could be preserved from the sacking of the city and then pass in security into the hands of the new Latin Emperor Bonjour II. It wasn't the case, however, of the Church of Our Lady of Patience, where at that moment, the shroud of Christ seen by Robert de Clary was kept, because this church was located outside the imperial palace. The Mandylion, once arrived in Paris, will be exposed in the royal treasure of the Holy Chapel and disappear definitively during the French Revolution. The epitaphos trail. We saw that the hypothesis of the Mandylion being the folded shroud of Turin doesn't correspond to what we see on the shroud of Turin. No blood traces, no entire body image. By considering those facts, maybe it would be easier to suppose that this shroud had always been considered as a burial shroud with blood traces and maybe with also a visible body image. A trail allows making a link between an ancient Orthodox tradition and the Shroud of Turin. It is the epitaphos trail. Actually, the epitaphos are embroidered and painted clothes showing an image of the Christ lying on his burial shroud. They rest on the altar of Orthodox churches on the evening of Holy Saturday, right until the day prior to the Feast of the Ascension. The first known epitaphos can be dated around the year 1200. During the 7th century AD in Jerusalem, people venerated a shroud of Christ of about 2.2 meters long, but without any mention of an image. Also, in the same account, another clause is mentioned. On this clause are embroidered certain representation of the 12 apostles, and there is shown an image of the Lord himself. On one side, the color of this clause is dark brown, and on the other side, in certain parts, the color is green. We will see this type of depiction on later epitaphos. In 944, when the Mandylion arrived in Constantinople, Gregory Referendarius explained in his highly apologetical discourse that the image of the Mandylion had been produced with the drops coming from Christ's suite of agony, and depending on translation, another image or relic had been produced by the drops of blood from his side. The text is not descriptive enough to identify these other relics, but the author seems to make a clear difference between two relics located in two different places. Starting from there, we can understand why the accounts of pilgrims who visited Constantinople will always make a clear distinction between the Mandylion and one or more shrouds of Christ, among whom one would have showed traces of blood and a complete image of his body. In the 10th century, during the religious ceremony in Constantinople, the emperors followed a very precise ceremonial in order to go to the church of Hagia Sophia. During their entry to the church, they stopped inside a building in front of the image of the Patience, or in other words, the image of Edessa. Then, when they arrived at the church of Hagia Sophia, where was an altar called the Holy Table, the emperors must lean down and kiss the image of the Holy Table cloth. So, we got here a cloth large enough to cover the altar, a cloth with an image important enough to be especially reserved to the altar of Hagia Sophia. Another document allows making a link between the Shroud of Turin and the Epitaphio's iconography. It is the Precodex, which dates from the end of the 12th century. On one of the drawings included in these documents, we see an angel pointing out what looks like an open and empty tomb after the resurrection. Along with this, the holes drawn on the shroud correspond almost exactly to the burn holes, so characteristic of the Shroud of Turin. Then there are also clues a bit less evident that allow linking it with the shroud and/or with the Epitaphios tradition. First, we have the angel who indicates the empty shroud to the woman. Then there is the wave of the cloth, which is so characteristic of the Shroud of Turin and which is found on some epitaphios. There are also red crosses, which is also found on many epitaphs. You can see the red crosses. Even if there is no body image on this part of the drawing, a clue allows understanding that the blood-stained body had really been lying on it, because under the angel's left foot, we found two bloodstains. There. However, it is impossible to say if all these old testimonies speak of one and the same clause, and to certify that it is the Shroud of Turin. Conclusion. We demonstrated that a critical reading of the text that speaking of an image, while taking into account the historical and religious context surrounding the Edgar story, allow us to understand that this image was most probably invited to back up the dogmas of the church. We have seen that the image of Edessa changed its nature every time a new dogma was proclaimed. Non-existing when the Edgar legend was invented in Edessa around the 3rd century AD, this image was introduced in the legend at the beginning of the 5th century AD as a painted portrait in order to confirm the dogma of the Incarnation. Finally, it acquired the status of a miraculous image not made by human hands that had a protective power for the city. Also, whether in his iconography or in the Edgar legend, the image of Edessa had always been considered as a small cloud that could only show the face of Christ, while the few allusion to an entire body are isolated texts that served each time a certain theology. The Epitaphius trail, even if it cannot date back the Shroud of Turin before the 10th century AD, is nevertheless clear and simple because it respects the true nature of the shroud, which is a burial cloth. Through a critical, historical approach of the text, we think that the Mandylion and the Shroud of Turin were two different relics. However, there are many evidence that the Shroud of Turin was one of the other relics kept in Constantinople before the 13th century. Thank you.